I'm going to just set some expectations real quick so you guys know a little bit about what to expect over the next hour. About a year after I graduated, I took a trip. I was mentioning some others. This was probably one of the things I felt like I spent money on that I'm glad I did. And I took a trip to Africa and went by myself, met with some people I had really no prior knowledge of. And in one of the trips, I was in South Africa, and I got to spend some time with a nonprofit called Crown Financial Ministries. I'm not sure if anybody knows who Crown is. Crown was basically kind of the precursor to Dave Ramsey, okay? And what they taught was biblical financial principles. While I was there, the guy that led that said, Ryan, I'm going to take you through something called Career Direct. It's a 260-question questionnaire, and the end result is this is going to print a report, and it's going to tell you who you are. It's going to tell you your values, your beliefs, and at the end, it's going to tell you occupations you should be pursuing based on your blueprint. And so we went through it, and at the end, the occupation report, out of 80 possible points, 75 out of 80 was you should go into business. Well, I knew that because I was very business-minded. I love business. I kind of studied it in college. The exact same point structure, 75 out of 80, pastor. Okay? So I'm telling you, if I start preaching this morning, that's where it's coming from, all right? So as I've studied the world of kind of finance and money, and we look at what the Bible has to say about how we should steward and look at finances, I really feel like we need to learn two things. One, I think we need to have a biblical reference for how we handle and use money. And the second thing is, I just think we need basic financial literacy. These two go hand in hand. It's hard to have one without the other. And so this morning, my goal is to be able to work through some thoughts with you. The first half is going to be just talking about what Scripture has to teach us about money and finance. The second half, we're going to get into financial literacy stuff and just say, hey, let's look at how we make good financial decisions. Now, that might be more of some feedback I want from you guys, because the world of finance is massive. We can spend weeks in here talking about all the different areas of money and finance and still not cover most of it. So we're going to try to squeeze this into about an hour. You guys go to that? Okay. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. I first want to talk about my history with money. So my perspective is this. I grew up in the state of Ohio. Anybody here from Ohio? Buckeyes? Here we go. I grew up in a family of 8 kids. Anybody here with a big family? 8 kids. I had 2 older sisters, and I was the oldest boy, which was like the worst spot you could ever be in. But my dad was a farmer. He unfortunately lost his farm in the 80s when things got tough. And the next thing he knew how to do was drive a semi-truck. So that's what he did the rest of his life. And I was very sensitive. God gave me a very sensitive spirit to how my parents were always doing financially. So I would sit in the basement. I would literally hear them having money arguments. And I started working when I was about the age of 13 at a hardware store in town, and I saved every dollar I could. And there were even times where, again, this is just God's intuition and spirit he gave to me. I would hear my parents struggling with money, so I would actually go and I would clip out letters from a newspaper. I would stick it on a sheet of paper so it would spell out, here you go, hope this helps. I would put money in it, then I'd put it in the mailbox. And I would sit in the basement and I would listen. When Mom went out to the mailbox and she opened up an envelope and she read it because she couldn't identify the handwriting, and she would have the money. And so my parents struggled their whole life financially. I was always sensitive to it. And I remember the second time I ever saw my dad cry. Now my dad was this big deer hunter guy, truck driver, tough guy, right? Very sensitive spirit, but he was a tough guy. Second time I've ever seen him cry, I was a sophomore at Taylor. I was at home for break. And he came to the basement where I was, and he says, with the tears in his eyes, he says, Ryan, I've done everything I can do. I've worked as hard as I can work. This guy would get up at 4 and get home at 11 every day, just working his tail off. And there was never enough. He sold everything he could sell. He did everything he could do. And he goes, Ryan, if we don't pay the house next week, we're losing it. I said, Dad, I've never been so honored to help. Here you go. At that moment, I'm like, I want to emulate this guy in so many ways, but I've got to learn the money thing. I've got to figure this out. So it kind of drove me into this whole area of how do you learn about money and finance. Not long after my wife and I got married, my wife here, She told me not to make too much of attention to her. It was her this morning. I'm going to try not to. But my wife and I got married, and let me take it actually a step back. I went on that trip to South Africa, and I had learned through Crown Financial Ministries all the biblical references. Here's all the ways that Bible says you should manage and use money. So I learned the principles. And so we get married, and we start off life, and the first thing I want to do as soon as we get life going is I want to start making it in real estate. That's my key out. So the first thing I did when we got married is I bought a rental property. This happened to be in Ohio. We get married, and we actually moved to Indiana. Okay, probably not a good idea. It's worked out, but it probably wasn't a good idea at the time. We own real estate in Ohio, live in Indiana. I moved to Indiana without a job. I ended up working with a mortgage company, and they said, Ryan, don't expect to make anything your first 3 months. I said, shoot, I'll make money right away. A lot of arrogance. 4 months later, I still hadn't earned a paycheck. Okay? At the beginning of all that, all of a sudden, real estate starts going south. Tenants stopped paying, place is vacant, got tore up, and all of a sudden, everything that we had saved prior to getting married just disappeared. We literally got to a point where we were living off of credit cards, just the fun things. We took a picture of our checking account. At one point, we hit rock bottom. I thought literally we were going bankrupt 6 months into marriage. Literally, I thought that's where we're heading. 6 months in, I take a picture of our bank account. It has $114 in it. We had thousands of dollars every month coming out in expenses. So we were at a point where I realized we were in big trouble. Okay? Let me talk about something here. I want to give you some perspective around where we stand as a country today. Here is what's fascinating. Today you live in an economy and a country that is the wealthiest the world has ever known. Okay? Let me give you some stats on why we come up with that. We live in one of the most diverse and creative economies in the world. Today, the U.S. controls about 42% of the world's wealth, and we only have about 3% of the world's population. There is a huge amount of wealth that is concentrated in the United States. Private wealth, that's just individuals, own collectively about $100 trillion in wealth. We are now one of the largest oil producers in the world. Some of the brightest thinkers of our time. We've got more Nobel Peace Prize winners than any country by a long shot. Some of the greatest industrialists and inventors. Economy, we live in a free enterprise system. Religion, we have complete freedom. And financially, you would think that we would also have the most freedom. But that's not the case. Okay? Where we are today, these get a little scary. 32% of Americans today, only 32%, keep any kind of a household budget. 40% of Americans will spend 110% of their income this year. 65% of Americans literally live paycheck to paycheck and have no household budget at all. 50% of Americans didn't save one penny last year. There is over $1 trillion in credit card debt. And for those that do carry credit card debt, the average is about $16,000 as a balance. There is over $1 trillion in student loan debt in the country today, and that is growing at a monumental rate. 25% of those with student loan debt never expect to pay it off. 50% of Americans working today have less than $2,000 saved for retirement, and over 1 million households will file for bankruptcy this year. Now, the highest percentage who are filing for bankruptcy, can you tell me who it is? Anybody want to guess? It's those over the age of 65. And it has grown in the last 20 years by over 200%. Guys, it's scary. Now, when you think of the last one, there's a lot of correlation to the one before it. Okay? There is. So if over 65, your parents, for most of you, it may be that they haven't saved along the way. That's why they're in that position now. So here's the point. We are in this wealthy economy, but yet we are struggling financially. There's a disconnect. What we're talking about this morning is how do we correct this? So there are 4 problems that I see. Okay, the first, and it sounds really weird, the risk of abundance. Okay? Now, how do I come up with that? Well, I'm going to go to the Bible for this. And I'm going to read from the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 8, 11 through 14, and then also 17 through 20. Here's what it says, and listen carefully. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, his decrees that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Verse 17, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so will you be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God. Are you guys hearing it? He was warning us against the abundance that was about to come. Now, I want to read from a second book. This is a book by Dallas Willard, and in here he references a passage by John Wesley. Okay, some of you may have read a lot on John Wesley, but this was John Wesley lamenting over the prosperous Christians. Here's what it says. He observed, however, that the form of life resulting from his preaching made his own converts prosperous, which then resulted in their becoming selfish, indulgent, and lacking in self-denial. He says, I am distressed. I don't know what to do. He even suggests that true scriptural Christianity has a tendency to, over time, to undermine and to destroy itself. It begets diligence and frugality, which makes one rich. By living the principles, you are actually following an order which would allow for wealth to be created. And wealth usually beget pride, love of the world, and every temper that is destructive to Christianity. So here's the thing. There is great risk in abundance. Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, God warned us against it's a blessing to have abundance, don't get me wrong. God desires to bless us. Throughout Scripture, you see it, you hear it, but he warned us about it. John Wesley in the 1700s were saying, hey, abundance can be risky. Here we are in 2019, it's the same thing. Abundance can be risky. Okay? The other thing that abundance does is it leads to impulsiveness. I remember when Chelsea and I were just dead broke. Our date night was we would go across the street to McDonald's and we'd buy a 59-cent ice cream cone, and we would share it, which is gross. Okay? We watched every penny. Now, granted, we didn't have many pennies, so that was easy to do. But we watched every penny we had. When all of a sudden there's abundance, you stop worrying about watching it closely. You become more impulsive. Okay? Here's the second thing we see when it comes to problems. One is discontentment. I call this comparison-based consumption. With technology today, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, all the other things, I'm not real big into that. I'm not saying it's wrong, just saying I don't get into it a whole lot, is we're constantly seeing people at their best. And so that becomes our measuring stick. They're on vacation, they just purchased a new home, they've got a new car, they did this, they did that, they did this. It's all of their best. We want to celebrate that with them, but it becomes the thing we compare ourselves to. Okay? Third one, lack of communication around finances. We're going to talk about communication here a little bit more, but this is an area that needs to improve, not only between couples, but also between generations. And lastly, our foundations for making decisions. We need to have a framework for how we make financial decisions, and that's something we'll also dive into a little bit more. Okay. So how did my wife and I, how did we get past the situation we're in? Again, completely in credit card debt. We sat down and literally hit our knees in prayer. And it was in that moment, God spoke to me. He says, Ryan, do you remember all the principles I taught you with Crown? You were teaching people in South Africa about how to handle their money. Apply them. So what we did is we started applying. I'm sorry if this is a little small for you guys. There's actually 6 that were identified by Ron Blue, if you guys follow Ron Blue or have read of Ron Blue, very great Christian man who is well known for his coaching in the area of finance. But I added one. I'll explain that. But these are the 7 planning principles. These are all biblically based. If you got nothing out of today, and this is the only thing you were able to pick up, this is what you want. This is a model for decision making around money and finance. The first one is understand that God owns it all. What we're doing here is we're just understanding who owns it. Now, I think as in Christian circles, we could say, yeah, God owns it all. There's no question around that. But do we really live it out? Because here's what happens. If God truly owns it all, every decision we will ever make is now a spiritual decision. Okay? Number 2, spend less than you earn. 3, avoid debt. We're going to dive into these more a little bit. 4, build liquidity. That means savings. Just have money in an emergency fund. 5, set long-term goals. 6, rejoice in generosity. And 7, one I've added in is pray for wisdom. Now, if you look next to each one of these, and at the end of it, I've put a spiritual muscle, as I like to call it. Okay? Here is kind of the byproduct of following these. Not only will you be in a much better position financially, your relationships will be healthier, you'll feel more content, you'll be more generous, but there's also spiritual development that's going to take place. I never realized it until we actually started living by these. So you see, understand God owns it all. That's reverence. Spend less than you earn. Contentment. We've got self-control, wisdom, patience, obedience, humility. As you go through these processes and you apply them in your life, you are also working a spiritual muscle. Over time, these things get easier and easier and easier because of the spiritual giftedness that's been coming from it. Does that make sense? Okay. Are we good on that, or do you guys need some more time on jotting those down? Take pictures if you need to. I can email these out. Everyone good? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move here a little quicker through some of these. There's some things that we need to know. One, if you look towards the bottom, goal setting is imperative. We're going to talk about goals in a little bit. Your personal success with money often comes down to daily decisions and habits. Giving increases prosperity. Your cash flow is the most important tool to create and build wealth, and the most successful people pay themselves first. So we're going to talk about some of these. 3 things that I feel like we're required to do. 1, we need to have a decision-making process. There's got to be something that we go through that helps us decide and understand what's important, how to make decisions, communication, and accountability. Okay? All right, so I want to give you a decision-making framework, and most of this comes just by questions you can be asking yourself as you go through it. Now, statistically, they say 95% of the decisions we make daily come down to money. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But your decision to come here today was based around money. The car you drive, the clothes you wear, the house you live in, whether you go to Starbucks or you go to McDonald's for coffee, it goes on and on and on and on and on. 95% of the decisions we make, and oftentimes come down to a money decision. So if you think about how many decisions you're going to be making over your entire lifetime, you better have a framework for how to make them. Unfortunately, what we do in today's, and this I think is a big problem of why we struggle so much, is we don't really train people on how to make good financial decisions, or we don't teach around money early enough. And so one of the biggest financial decisions you will ever make at the age of 18, you're deciding on a college you're going to go to. And we leave an 18-year-old to make a huge decision financially with no reference. Okay? I know some of you guys are smiling and laughing right now. I hit a chord, didn't I? All right, we're going to get you out of it. Don't worry. So the framework are these. I put 5 down. The first thing that you're going to want to do is identify what are the things that are most important to you. These are your values and your priorities. Okay? You need to have those always in front of you at some point, because if not, you're going to make a decision just based on a whim. You need to be having a lens that you make decisions through, and here's one of them. Does it align with my goals, values, and priorities? Does it? Does it fit in with what I feel like is most important in my life? If it doesn't, that could be an easy way to make a decision against it. How much time do I have to make a decision? I counsel with a lot of people, and all of a sudden it just feels like at times there's this crisis where in reality, they've got months. They don't have to make a decision today. You may have months before you need to make a decision. Will things get better or worse by waiting? It's a great question to ask. If there's the potential that things could improve just by being patient, it may be a much better decision for you. Number 4, seek 2 to 3 people out who could give you good advice in this area. Here's what I know. Money is the most personal thing in our lives. Okay, there is nothing more personal at times than money. So I am pretty confident that most of you here today don't walk around to all of your friends and say, here's where I am financially, what do you think? We are not getting any feedback at all in our lives when it comes to the area of finance. Okay? We need at times people who can give us some wise counsel that aren't looking at it from our point of view. Number 5 is prayer. Are you willing to wait and trust to see if God's willing to provide? Sometimes we act so soon that we miss out on some of God's great gifts. Okay? Does that help? All right. Can we talk about giving a little bit? All right, we can talk about giving a little bit. So one of the things I learned about when I had taken a trip to Africa, when I would drive back and forth from Indiana to Ohio, on Interstate 75, which runs north and south, there was this building, and it was called United States Plastics, and there was this giant neon sign on the side of the building that says, Christ is the answer. And I drove by that building for 4 years, going back and forth from school to Ohio. And I've always wondered, I'm wondering what that story is. What's this business about? Well, when I'm in Africa, I'm in South Africa actually, we're in Johannesburg, and the guy I'm with starts talking about a guy named Stanley Tam. Stanley Tam was the guy who owned United States Plastics on I-75 that I drove by for 4 years. The story of Stanley Tam is fascinating, and it's literally changed my life and the way I look at money. Stanley Tam, back in the 50s, started a silver mining business. And what they would do is he had this magnet that when they did the old photo development, there was silver they used, and that silver would end up just getting flushed down the drains. So he created this little magnet that says, hey, this will help collect all the silver, and then I'll come around and collect that silver, and that was his business. Well, it struggled. In fact, he literally never got the thing to really go off the ground. However, with $25 left in his pocket, God spoke to him very clearly and said, I want you to continue. So with another $12 he borrowed from his parents, he continued. This time he did so in a way that would honor God. He says, I want to make this business your business, and if you'll lead, I'll go. And guess what happens? The business starts taking off. Okay, things change. Not long after that, he heard a very clear vision from God that said, or heard a very clear voice from God that says, do you trust me? And Stan says, of course I trust you. God says, give me 51% of your business. So Stanley went to 3 different attorneys. The third attorney finally decided to do it, even though they thought he was crazy. And they literally signed 51% of the company over to God. Yeah. All of that revenue, the 51%, would go into an organization which would eventually be given away. Now, he's speaking in the Philippines years later, speaking in the Philippines, and during a sermon, God once more says, do you trust me? Stanley said, of course I trust you. God says, do you trust me enough to sign over all of the business? So sure enough, he did. He took a salary, gave 100% of the controlling business to God. Guess what happened? Business takes off. To this date, somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $200 million has been poured into the kingdom for ministry and outreach, all because he was willing to be obedient. So here's what I talk about when it comes to giving. Giving always starts with obedience. I can't tell you, it would be in my mindset and capacity to wake up someday and say, I just want to start giving all of my money away. I don't know if I would have that desire, but where God started with was, do you trust me? That's an act of obedience, okay? Now, I was thinking about Stanley's story, and I thought, what did he really lose? I asked that question, and when you think about it, he didn't lose anything. He had a struggling business. There was really not much there when he owned it. But think about what he gained. He gained everything. I mean, think about it, his life would be so much different now if he tried to control the company. He gained everything. When we act in obedience, God is faithful. Number 2, giving breaks the power of discontentment. So I'm teaching you guys this morning, when you think about your finances, giving has to be part of it. I'm just encouraging this. You cannot be discontent and generous at the same time. So if you're struggling with discontentment at all, and you're envious of maybe what other people of God are doing, go give something away, okay? It'll break the power of discontentment in our lives. 3, giving opens the door to further experience God's grace. The key word is experience. If at any point in your life right now, you just feel like, you know what, I don't feel in sync with where God is and what he's trying to do in my life, go give something away. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, you read a lot about how the Israelites had experienced God firsthand. They saw the miracles of what he did. The next generations fell away. Why was that? The Bible, in a footnote, it literally said because they had not experienced the Lord. They knew who he was, but he hadn't experienced him. If you get around anybody who has been giving over their lifetime, I can promise you, ask them, how have you experienced God in your giving? They will give you stories all day long. If you give, it's going to create a greater experience with God as your Savior. And then 4th, giving enriches the lives of others, which is a huge thing. Okay. Let me talk about the 4 S's of giving. We'll just run through this real quick. I label it down to 4: substance, significance, sacrificial, and spontaneous. Okay? What I call the 4 S's of giving. With substance, are you giving something of value? Value could be different for all of us. For some, giving money might be real easy, but giving times, I don't know, I got a tight calendar. That may be the thing that you're willing to give. Significance, are you giving where God is at work? Sacrificially, does it hurt when you give? And 4, spontaneous, are your heart and eyes open to the needs around you? Spontaneous giving could be one of the fun things that you do. You may just put $100 or $50 or $10 in your pocket and say, Lord, direct me as where I'm going to give this, and just see what he does. You might be blown away by the door he opens for you to give. And that was a unique experience that you now have in doing that. Okay. Okay. We're going to talk more about this in budgeting, but I tell people all the time I work with, your cash flow, okay, what cash flow is, that's money coming in. So if you're working, money coming in is the most important tool to create wealth that you'll ever have. Now, unless you're one of the lucky ones here that maybe won the lottery, the rest of us have to work for it, okay? That's cash flow. You've got to learn how to manage the money coming in. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. The most successful people learn to pay themselves first. I don't think you'll mind me saying, but I was in a car ride with Gary Yaddick about 6-7 months ago, and I asked him, I said, Gary, he's got a great business in the community, has a huge heart for the Lord and giving, but I asked him, I said, what's the difference in how people think around money? He goes, Ryan, you know what it is? He goes, here's how the wealthy think. Or he says, here's how the poor think. The poor think you've got to work for money. The wealthy think, how do you make your money work for me? Okay? How do you get money to work for you? It's just a difference in thinking. That's all it is. And they learn how to pay themselves first. Now, I'm assuming you've already been giving, okay? But too many people will go through 40 years of work and they'll have nothing to show for it. They paid everyone else first and they left themselves last. What I always tell people is after you've done your giving, put yourself first in line, pay yourself first, and then you worry about everyone else. Okay, now it doesn't mean don't make the mortgage payment, but I'm just saying learn how to pay ourselves first is a huge key in helping handle money. Let's talk about perspective. I know I'm going through some things fast. I just got a lot to cover. You guys read this? I love this. As the father sees, yeah, it's just a little toss. As the child sees it, but then there's mom. Okay? Always looks extreme. But here's where we're going, and that is this got moved over. Communication. Okay? Communication. This is a huge area when it comes to managing money well. What I know is this, and I've counseled with a lot of people, is that people have a different perspective on money. Now, who all here is married? I want to just get an idea of who I'm speaking with. Okay, for those that are not, you grew up with a perspective around money. That is, you watched your parents, grandparents, people you love in your life make financial decisions, and you created a belief and a value system along the way. Okay. For those that are married, you've probably realized this already. Your wife has a different perspective than you do, okay? They grew up in a different environment than maybe you did. You both have different beliefs on the way money should be handled. I've got a couple that I work with, love them. He grew up in a pretty harsh environment financially, watched his parents struggle as well, so he was kind of always afraid of not having enough. She grew up in a household that just loved to spend money. They weren't savers, they just loved to spend it. And when they come in, I'll be honest with you, every appointment I think we've ever had, it somewhere in the appointment, it always turns into a fight. And then I become like the marriage counselor and we kind of get people squared away. And I've learned over the years that like there's triggers that start it. And one of them is a pony. He wants to save money. She loves her pony. It's got to be like one of their kids. She loves the pony and is willing to spend all kinds of money on the pony. He hates the pony. It keeps him from saving because it costs so much. And so before the meeting, I'm like, all right, just stay away from the pony, we'll be good. Stay away from the pony, we'll be good. We're getting into the meeting, we're talking, feel like the progress is getting made. Guess what happens? Now, if you just get rid of the pony, lose control, everything goes haywire from there on out. The point is they've got a different perspective on how to handle and manage money. Their values and their priorities are different. You're going to have that, but the importance of communication is learning at an early age how to work through that. Because if you don't, there will always be tension, strife, and chaos, especially in a marriage. And one of the things we realize, it's hard to see, but 50% of divorces today happen because of money issues. We have to have a better way of communicating around money, okay? Now, I'll kind of walk you through some tidbits on this. Here's the things that we've learned. One, agree on goals, values, and priorities, okay? It all stems from there. Sit down and have a conversation. Just say, hey, what's most important in your life? Here's a few things that are most important in mine. How as a couple do we come together to be able to kind of align the things that are the most important, okay? Make financial decisions together, not independently. If you're married, change this one thing, it'll change so many things for you financially. Make decisions together. What some people will do is they'll set a dollar figure. They might say, hey, if we're going to spend $25 or more, we have to come together to decide on it. For other people, it might be $50 or $100. Now, if it's a $5 meal at McDonald's, you don't have to call your wife in the middle of the workday and say, hey, can I eat at McDonald's? That's probably not what you have to do. Set a figure, and anything above that, come together, decide on how you want to handle it. For those that aren't married yet, when you do marital counseling, which I highly recommend, make sure money is the topic of one of them. Usually have a number of sessions. You'll meet with a pastor, somebody that you really respect, and they'll kind of lead you through all the, here's the things you got to really prepare for in marriage. Make sure money is one of them, okay? Pray together over your finances. review a budget. We're going to talk about how to create a budget a little bit later and some of the tools to use for that. Here's some don'ts for you, okay? One, I am a big proponent of this. Don't use different accounts, okay? I highly recommend you use one account. So what'll happen sometimes is you get married and it's got a him account and a her account, okay? I'm not saying it's bad. It reduces the ability to communicate, okay? Don't hide money. All right? Don't hide purchases. These three things right here, if you could avoid them, I highly recommend it. It'll make the home a happier place to be. Okay. We good so far? I know, Ethan, could we go like 10 more minutes maybe on some of these topics? I got a lot of stuff, guys. How long do you want to be here? All right. Generational communication. So here's something that I've been talking about with a lot of people. As a couple, okay, we've figured some things out. We want to communicate as a couple, but I don't think it stops there. One of the things I tell people all the time is stewardship, okay? We all take this responsibility. We hear in the Christian circles, okay, what does it mean to be a steward? What's a manager of God's stuff? One of the key responsibilities of stewardship is preparing the next generation to be a steward. Now, I know there's a lot of young ones in here. I've got kids. I know some others in here that might have some kids. Your parents obviously are in this situation. One of the best things you can do is prepare the next generation to become a steward. So, baby boomers, okay, those that are, I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but let's say 60 and above. One of the wealthiest generations we've seen. Over $30 trillion will pass on from the baby boomers to the next generation. There's going to be this massive transfer of wealth that eventually comes. So for you that are younger, here's my tip. Be really nice to your parents, okay? Make sure you call mom at least once a week, all right? But the most important thing is, do you see why this is such a big deal? Because if you yourselves aren't ready to become a steward of what's about ready to pass on, if you're in that position, money can be a blessing or a curse. Money can be a blessing or a curse. You hear the horror stories of people winning the lottery? What happens? They just blow right through it. And the reason for that is the Bible says, what use is money in the hands of a fool if he has no desire to gain wisdom? Okay? You have to be wise. You have to have a biblical wisdom if you want to handle money well. If you don't, foolishness will cause money to be a curse. So if money's inherited, it has to come with a biblical stewardship principle that we can follow to manage it well. So how do we do this? I recommend families have family meetings around money. We need to open up the door of communication between parents and kids. Okay? Sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable because I know there's a generation of people that don't like to talk about money. Okay? But you're not preparing the next generation if you don't. If you ever watch, I grew up on a farm and you seem like it works really well. You watch a farm family. They're all in that thing together. Grandparents, parents, and kids, grandkids. They're all in that thing together. Any generation knows how to operate the farm. Okay? So if grandfather passes away, it doesn't change anything. If mom and dad pass away, the kids know how to run the farm. They know what the finances are. They know what the land is. They know how to do everything. It's an easy transition. What we do is we have a bunch of money, we die, we never tell our kids about it until they read the will. How's that transition going to look? Could be messy. Okay? We have to open up the door of communication between generations. Parents, include your children in financial decision making. Whether you're 70, whether you're 30, bring your kids into an environment where they're taking part in the decisions we make. My wife and I do something simple. Every once in a while, we'll say, hey guys, we're going to go out to eat this week. We've got $30 to spend. Where do you think we can get the best bang for a buck? Get some input. I started at the age of 8. When our child turns 8 years old, they have a meeting with dad. We go out to breakfast. They go to my office and they have to listen to my spiel. Okay? And they usually say, Dad, I have no idea what you're talking about. We put money in an account for them, and every year on their birthday, we have another meeting. Okay? The point is, just Just bring him into the conversation, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. All right. Accountability. Referenced this a little bit ago. Dr. Wayne Schmidt once said, I've never forgotten, he says, the greatest danger is to live an uninspected life. Sorry, I misspelled that. Uninspected life. That means we've got no one in our life that's willing to ask us the hard questions. Okay? You need one person at least in your life that you can say at any time, hey, ask me about how I'm doing financially. Inspect my heart. Tell me if I'm pursuing the wrong things with my money. We all need someone like that in our life, okay? Okay, now, here's what we get to. At this point, it's easy to start feeling like, well, man, if I'm going to be a steward, I just feel like I can't spend anything. You know? God's saying, I just got to live a life of poverty, and I got to give it all away. Okay? Do you guys feel like that at times? Can I give you some freedom this morning? I mean, not too much freedom, but some freedom. I know who I'm speaking to this morning. So let's talk about this a little bit. The Bible says in Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. There's some other scripture verses I want to read to you. You're going to listen through because I don't have these up here. Deuteronomy 28, 1-6 says, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all of his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You will be blessed in the city and you'll be blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land, and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. Luke 6:38 says, give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured into your lap, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Lastly, Proverbs 3:9-10, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Can you hear God's blessing? I have no doubt God desires to bless us. He gave his son for us. He desires to see you happy and joyful and blessed. Okay? Here's where I think we run into some challenges, and that is we focus so much on the blessing and we forget who it was that gave it. Okay? The best way I can kind of explain this is I think truly God wants us to be able to enjoy things. So let's say you guys, married couple, just had maybe done something really great. You paid off a car or you wanted to go celebrate something. It's your anniversary, okay? And you're trying to be wise, you're trying to be a steward, budget well, spend your money the right way, and you decide, hey, let's go out to eat. And you've got a choice. We can either go to Burger King and just try to be frugal tonight and not spend a whole lot, or we can go to Texas Roadhouse and we get a killer steak. It'll be fun. You're at a moment now where you get to decide. My gut feeling is if you've been following the financial principles and you're really trying to honor God with the way you handle and manage money, I really think that God's up in heaven. Okay, he's sitting on his throne. All the angels in glory are sitting there praising him. And he's leaning forward. And he's watching about what you're ready to do. And I think what he's going to do at that moment, he's going to start chanting, steak, 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 steak. I really think God works that. I hope that's the case. I think God says, in that moment, go enjoy it. And this is a battle of mine because the way I grew up, I was so scared to spend money. I really was, and that was just something I had to get over. But I still think God wants you to enjoy it reasonably, balanced, with great priorities, okay? Now, here is the most critical piece of that whole thing. When you're sitting there and you're just lost in conversation with your bride and you're having a great night and you're just enjoying the steak, don't stop there. Because if your whole concentration became how good this steak is, you missed it. At that point, if you go through the Old Testament, you hear how they would they'd cut up a cow and put it on the altar. They would burn that meat, and there was an aroma that was lifted to the Lord, and he was pleased. The aroma of our hearts, which is our thankfulness, is a pleasing experience to God. So in the moments of enjoying that steak, just say, God, thank you for this blessing. You know what blessing means? Unmerited favor. Thank you for the favor you've given me. I appreciate this night with my wife, and I appreciate this food. Thank you. Now, if you decided to go to Burger King instead, great. Be thankful. Whatever the favor is God has given you, whatever that blessing is, the most important part is not the blessing. It is the fact that you're willing to take a moment and say, God, I didn't deserve this, but I thank you for it. Okay? And that's the spirit and the mindset we need to have when it comes to spending. Now, 2 things to live by. Don't buy something if you're not willing to lend it or give it away. Okay? Here's when you know you're probably making a good spending decision. If you buy something and it's too important for you to let someone else use, the problem is it's too important. 2, celebrate the giver of all things as much as you celebrate the gift. Saying, God, thank you. I want you to repeat that over and over again. Anytime you're in a moment where you're just appreciative of what you have, thank you. Thank you. Okay? So the first half, we got to talk a lot about just biblical wisdom and what the Bible has to say about money and finance, and I know we hit on a lot. So hopefully you guys were able to at least get 1 or 2 things there that you can continue to use going forward. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about just the financial literacy side. And I've got a ton of slides on this, so there might come a point here after I go through a few of them where I just might ask for your feedback as to what you want to know about. Because again, there's so much we can cover. So I'm going to first start with just goal setting. I love this verse in Ephesians. It says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Here's when I read that verse, what I really think comes to mind is focus. And if you think about a goal, what is a goal? A goal is nothing more than what you're focused on. Okay? In the most simplistic way. It's just focused. Now, if you're willing to just stay focused on something, so the easiest way to figure out a goal is just what's the most important thing in my life right now financially that I want to accomplish? That's a very easy question to ask yourself to really narrow down what's important. If you're willing to stay focused, and studies show if you're willing to stay focused for at least a year, you can change your life. The problem is, as we've gotten into January and everyone started their New Year's goal, is that most of us give up by the 2nd or 3rd day. Okay? If you're willing to stay focused for a year, you could actually just change your life. So if you watch somebody that decides they're going to take on a diet or exercise goal, and they just stay dialed in and driven towards that for 12 months, they will be an entirely different person 12 months from now. If you look for someone that says, hey, I want to change relationships in my life, and I want to start pouring into the people around me because I haven't been. And they stay dialed in and focused on building and strengthening relationships. And 12 months from now, it's going to look completely different for them. Our finances are the same way. If you set a goal and you stay dialed in and you stay focused on it and you create a pattern and a rhythm in life as to how you're going to hit that goal, financially, you'll be in a completely different place 12 months from now. Okay? So what we're doing is we're setting a goal and we're going to focus on it. Now, here's how you get to that point. One, I always want to lead in prayer and just praying over, Father, what is I need to be attentive to in my financial life? Highlight for me where I'm falling short or I'm just missing the ball when it comes to where I am financially. Again, you're going to see this pattern over and over. Your values and priorities are really important. Understand or identify and write out your goal. I'm not going to get into the whole SMART acronym. You talk about specific, measurable, attainable. Just know I want to accomplish this by this. And we're going to get into short-term, intermediate, long-term goals here in a minute. But you got to have something you're aiming for, okay? Other things to consider, are they worthwhile? Okay, I've used this story before. I remember when I was 16 and in the peak of my wisdom years, I was driving a 1988 Chevy Beretta, okay? You guys don't even know what that is, okay? And when I pulled up to a stop sign, I bought this thing for $800 cash from a guy I worked with. And when I would pull up to a stop sign, it would stall. So what I had to do is when I pulled up to the stop sign, I actually had to put it in neutral and I had to rev it, okay? So the best part is you go to a light, everyone thought you were racing. Just, and so that's the only way you'd keep it from stalling. And then as soon as the light turned green, while you were revving it, you'd put it in drive and just and go. So, sweet car. But at that time, my values, okay, I thought having a stereo system in this thing would be the best thing I could put my money into. So, in a 1988 Chevy Beretta that was worth $800, I went out and I bought two 12-inch Rockford Fosgate subwoofers, okay? Now, you guys don't know what cool is like. I put these subs in my trunk. They're big, big speakers that make that big thumping sound, And I put like a 400-watt amp on this thing. In the dash, I put a real cool CD player. Went to Best Buy. I spent like $1,200 on this thing. My car's worth $800. And I tell you what, I had a stereo system. Now, the problem with two 12-inch Rockford Fosgate subs in a 1988 Chevy Beretta is it would rattle the whole car. Just, you'd hear like bolts and screws just working loose. So my point in that story, 5 years later, 10 years later, was that really a worthwhile goal? Probably not. I so wish I had that $1,200 today. I would find so many more meaningful things to use with it. So my point in that is, ask yourself, is this a worthwhile goal, and will it continue to be a worthwhile goal 5 and 10 years from now? If you need some perspective on that, go ask somebody who is older than you. In fact, the longer your perspective on a decision, usually the better your decision is. So here's another way of doing it. If I was 70 years old today, would this be a smart move? Would I look back on this and say I would be proud of having done that? That puts some perspective around your decision, okay? And if you got 12-inch subs in your car, I'm not shaming you, I'm just saying. It may not be the best thing. When you set a goal, you create an efficiency of resources. You become much more focused and efficient with everything you do. Here's another one. Now, we may not be thinking about this so much when you're 20 or you're 25 or you're 18. But there's two questions. One, identifying a proper goal, but then also asking yourself, where's the finish line? Okay? Here's what we can tend to do in America today is we can accumulate, let's say someone's saving for a retirement. Okay? I'm going to save like mad, I'm going to save like mad, I'm going to save like mad. And there comes a point where you don't know when you need to stop saving. Because at some point, saving turns into hoarding. And for people who especially grew up in environments where money was really, really limited, they're fearful of not having enough, like I was. And so our natural tendency is to save and save and save and save and save and accumulate just based on fear. And they get to a point where they might have more than they'll ever need, but they don't know when to stop. And so it turns from saving to hoarding. And that's not healthy either, okay? So if you know where your finish line is, now you know where reasonably I have enough. And from that point, okay, God, what do I do with my excess? Okay? So again, speaking maybe to a different generation, but that's something to keep in mind. Type of financial goals, paying off debt is always a great thing to do. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. having a giving goal or even having a savings goal every year. Again, we'll talk more about that. So here's some ways of setting up some goals. One is your short-term goals. Your short-term goals are always, in my mind, 1 year or less. These are things you can get to really quick. Examples of that could be, hey, I need to build up some emergency money. Now, when I say emergency money, here's what stats show. Every 3 years, you could expect an expense out of the blue of $3,000 to $5,000. Car breaks down, roof needs fixed, medical bill, who knows what it's going to be. There's going to be an expense every couple years of anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. What an emergency fund is, it's money you're putting aside in an account that's not to be used for pizza or golf or anything else. It's there for emergencies. So when life breaks loose and sends you an unexpected expense, this is how we handle it. Because if you don't put the money there, how else do you pay for it? Where does it normally go? Visa, MasterCard, Capital One, someone else is picking up the tab, okay? And that's where debt oftentimes can be created. So if we know it's coming, set it aside. That's the emergency fund. Paying off debt is obviously a good thing. We're going to talk about that. If you know there's an expense coming up, let's say in 12 months, hey, I know I've got a tuition bill. I know I've got to put carpet in my house. I know there's an expense that I can already see. I'm going to start saving for that now, okay? Intermediate goals. These are from 1 to 5 years out. We're looking down the road a little bit. Examples of that could be when I graduate, I got to buy a car. How can I start saving some money today in 4 years so that I've got enough money set aside or at least, hopefully I can pay cash for that car, if not pay for most of it, okay? Maybe down the road we know we're going to be buying a house. And for people buying a house, the rule of thumb is try to put 20% down on the house. That means if your house costs $100,000 when you buy it, you should have $20,000 in the bank to pay for it. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we know it's coming. Let's start saving for that. For some people, it could be a vacation that's coming up. Long-term goals are always 5 years or longer. Could be kids' college, could be retirement, could be working to pay off the mortgage. The next thing you'll do, and let's just use an example of a car. Let's say the car is going to cost us about $12,000. So what we need to do is need to determine the cost, and then the second thing is we need to start allocating resources. Okay? Now, let's say you've got a car you're going to buy in 5 years and it's going to cost you $12,000. You're estimating. What I recommend is you use something called a sinking fund. Okay? Here's a fancy financial terminology. All you're doing is saying, if it's going to cost me $12,000, I've got 60 months to save. How much do I need to be putting in every month for the next 60 months so that in 5 years when I've got to buy the car, I've got enough to pay cash for it? In this case, you save $200 a month for the next 60 months and you'll have $12,000 and you'll be able to pay cash for the car. Now, if you're fortunate, maybe your parents, when you graduate, say, here's a car, we want you to get started on the right foot. What I would encourage you to do, what I wish I would have done, is said, hey, if I don't have to buy a car today, how soon will it be before I have to buy my next one? And if it's 5 years down the road, great. When I have to replace this one, because it's not going to last forever, how much am I going to need? How much should I start saving every month now to pay for cash for that car when the time comes? Okay? Does it make sense? Okay, allocate money as it comes in towards the things that we know are coming up. That's how you kind of fund your goals. Any questions on that? Okay, let's talk about cash flow a little bit. Again, cash flow is money coming in and money going out. Money coming in, money going out. That's cash flow. Now, if you have more money coming in than what's going out, it's called margin. That means we got a little extra. But when you have more going out than what's coming in, you know what that's called? It's called a problem. Okay? All right? We got to fix the problem. So you need to live a lifestyle to where you have more coming in than what's going out. We call that cash flow. The problem today is, on average, the average American spends almost 50% of their income just paying debt. That makes it really tough. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. God came to what? Christ, when he came to earth, he came to set us free. There's a desire God has for all of us to be free, okay? The problem is, oftentimes we're really good at doing dumb things that jeopardize that. What debt does, and I don't want you to take on the wrong implications on this. I think there's good debt and I think there's bad debt, okay? Here's my philosophy around debt. You talk to maybe Dave Ramsey or somebody different, you might hear a whole different story. I think a lot of similarities, but here's my thought. You can borrow money on things that maintain their value. So a house is one, okay? A house is going to maintain its value. It's okay if you have to take a little bit of debt out to buy a house. Avoid borrowing money on things that go down in value, okay? So back in my day and age, there used to be something called layaway. Some of those that are older remember the concept of layaway. Have you guys ever heard of layaway, some of the younger generation? So what we would do, there used to be this place called Kmart, okay? Kmart, I know. What you would do is, I remember as a kid, I wanted to buy a bike, this Huffy bike. Let's say it was $60. And what I would do, I went to Kmart, picked that bike out. That's the one I want. Well, Ryan, do you have enough to pay for it? No, I don't. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put it in layaway. They're going to take it off the rack. They're going to go put it in their back shelves somewhere. And you have to come in every time you get a little bit of money and you have to pay towards that bike until it's paid off. So I would save up some money. I would work and I would go in maybe every 2 weeks with $10 and, hey, I want to put this on my bike. And they would give me a receipt showing how much I had left. Well, finally there came a point where I made the last $10 payment. And guess what I got? A brand new bike. Brand spanking new, hadn't been ridden yet. And I got to take that thing home and enjoy it. What do we do today? Okay, I want to buy something. I don't want to wait. Let's just put it on the credit card. We'll pay for this as we go. Now, what happens a year or 2 years later? 3 years later, 4 years later, 6 years later, when they finally made the last payment? Guess what you have? Nothing. You don't even remember where it is, right? It's long gone, but you're still paying on it. That's what debt does. You literally make payments on things you don't even enjoy anymore, okay? It reduces our freedom. It also what we call mortgages the future, okay? When you take on debt, you're mortgaging your future. What that means is you're limiting your options. Let's talk about debt. I want to give you an example of what I mean by this. And here's something I really, really believe, is that debt costs so much more than what the original cost is. Okay, so let's do some math here. A lot of times I'll get the question of, okay, Ryan, I've got some debt, but I've also got some money over here, and I have the ability to pay this debt off. What should I do? I can either invest this money and let it grow and earn compound interest over all the years, or I can come in and pay this debt off. I want to give you a thought around this. One, let's assume somebody's got 3 different credit cards. They owe $3,000, $5,000, $7,000. The payments are $100, $200, and $300 a month. Okay, so they're paying out $600 a month on their credit card debt. They owe $15,000. They're 30 years old, and the choice is, should I take this $15,000 and should I invest it? Because I've got 35 years to let this grow. It becomes a pretty good chunk of change. Or should I pay the debt off? Okay. So here's what it looks like. If you would have invested $15,000 for the next 30 years and you earn 10% interest on it, it would be worth $260,000. Okay? What happens if you take that same $15,000 and you pay your debt off? And you take the $600 a month and you invest it every month for the next 30 years. You see the difference? Here's the thing. All of our cash flow is going to pay debt. If we didn't have the debt, think about what we could do from a savings perspective. You remember that first slide, or one of the first slides I show you, who's got the greatest risk of bankruptcy today, it's over 65, we need to be thinking long term with our decisions too, okay? You'd have $1.3 million if you just saved it. Now, actually, that number gets bigger because here's why. If you've got to make a $600 debt payment, you actually have to earn $750. And the reason that is because the government's going to tax you, and if you make $750, you bring home $600, okay? But then if you're also tithing, you have to think, well, I actually got to make $833 because I'm going to give the first 10% to the Lord. That leaves me with $750. The IRS is going to tax that. Now I've got $600, okay? You actually have to make $833 to pay $600. You start calculating all of the costs and the lost benefit of borrowing, you begin to realize the problem and why we're faced with what we are. Make sense? I know we're getting into the numbers now, all right? So let me know if it doesn't make sense. Here's the last thing I will say. I think, this is my belief, I think a tremendous amount of leadership has been lost in this country because of debt. Here's why. If you've lost flexibility, you've lost the ability to be free to God's will and direction in your life because you've made yourself subject to the debt payments. Because here's what happens. People may feel called to go do something, but they're afraid to give up the income that they're making right now because they know that at least it's going to cover their debts. And if we've surrendered ourselves to debt like that, we have no further freedom. Think about the leadership that's lost because people can't do something that they're actually called to. Okay? So it's a financial issue, but then it starts becoming a spiritual issue. So in life, we've got major financial decisions that can often take place. Here's the big four: cars, home, investing, and college. Okay, it's those four. I can narrow it down to those things are the biggest financial decisions people have to make. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a framework. I'll tell you maybe what to highlight in this. These are what I call financial guardrails. If you think about what a guardrail does, is if you're going across a big bridge, and we've got the ability to drive anywhere we want in the bridge, we just don't want to go off the bridge, right? So we put guardrails on it. And it's saying, hey, you can live within these guardrails. If you go outside the guardrail, it gets a little hairy. So these are some guardrails that I'm going to ask you to kind of just keep as a reference. Debt ratio. So what a debt ratio is, just how much of your income is going towards paying debt. I would love to see it at 0, okay? But if you look at it, if your total income is $50,000 a year, we say try not to have more than 36% to cover all your debt. The average American has 47%. We say you need to be under 36 or 30, okay? So add up all your debt payments every month, divide it by your income, and if it's greater than 30%, you need to fix it. You need to pay something off, okay? Make sense? It's a guardrail. Now, a lot of people will be buying a house someday. Love that. But you need to have a reference for how much you can spend. I have seen people spend way more than they should, and it created a big problem financially. So, 25% of your paycheck or less. Now, you see that word that says monthly net income? Okay, let me give you a quick difference. You got gross income and you got net income. Gross income is how much you make. Net income is how much you bring home. So of that amount, 25% or less is what you could afford on a house. So if you bring home $4,000 between a married couple, don't spend more than $1,000 on your mortgage payment. Okay? Does it make sense? Okay. Savings. This is more long-term savings. Rule of thumb, save 10%. If you can save 10% of your income every year for as long as you work, you'll have plenty, okay? Save 10%. Now, for some of you, it may be, Ryan, I'm trying to get some debt paid off first. I honor that. I honor that because it's going to free up cash flow down the road that you can invest more. If you have to start at 1 or 2 or 3%, start at 1 or 2 or 3%, and then just try to increase it as time goes on, okay? But make it a goal at some point to get to 10% of your savings should go to long-term investment accounts. An emergency fund. A lot of people say, well, how much should I put in an emergency fund? If you are a single income family, so let's say you're married, one of you works, the other spouse stays at home, one income. I've always said you have a need for more of a bigger emergency fund, because if you lose your job, that's the only thing that's kind of backing you up. If you're married, 3 months. You have a little bit more flexibility. If one of you loses a job, you can still manage, but that's kind of the rule of thumb. And then obviously giving, if we can save 10% of our income, I've always looked at that as a minimum tithe. Again, I will also say when we were dead broke, we did not start with a fixed 10%. We started where we could. Okay? Do not feel shame for not saving or giving 10% right away. There are some pastors I've heard even say, if you have debt, don't give. I don't agree with that. I personally believe you want to be a cheerful giver, even in the midst of the challenge, because I think God honors that, but start where you can. Okay, don't get lost in it. All right. Can I get into some savings things? Let me maybe stop here. Is there areas of finance that you guys would just love to know about? That when you walked in this morning, you said, hey, if he could talk about this would be kind of fun. Anything in particular? Awesome. You guys are making it real easy. I'm just going to keep moving. Ethan, what time do we go till? I know we're pushing to... It's like a minute ago? Okay. Can you guys give me maybe 5 minutes maybe? Is that okay? Yeah, let's go. All right. So, long-term savings. I want to show you the difference of, let's say, in my perspective is this. If you're young, your first goal should be paying off debt. Okay? If you're young, your first goal should be paying off debt. Then the goal is to stay out of debt. If you got some college loans, I would go back and I would hustle, as soon as you graduate, I would hustle as hard as you can, live way below your means. I'm talking live meagerly. Okay? Drive old cars. Don't worry about trying to keep up with your friends on Facebook and their lifestyle. Live meager. And every extra thing you have, go towards paying off debt. Okay? It's going to be hard. It's going to be a grind. At times, it might even be embarrassing. Who cares? Free yourself up. Then we look at starting to save and invest. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details just because we don't have time, but investments, mutual funds, stocks, some of these things that you can put money into that help grow your money over time, I want to show you the advantage of starting early. Okay? Let's say these are fictitious names, John and Susan. They're age 24. They bust it. First couple years out of college, they get all their debt paid for. Now they got some extra money they want to save and invest. They start saying, we're going to put in 10% of their income or $5,000 each year into an investment vehicle. Let's not get lost in what it is, but just an investment. After 10 years, if they earn 10% of their money and they keep putting in $5,000 every year, okay? After 10 years, they're going to have about $140,000 saved. You can begin to see that what happens. After 20 years, it's like a snowball. Keeps accruing. Gets bigger and bigger. They have about 962. After 30 years, after 40 years, they'll have about $3.2 million when they're age 64. Now, let's say another scenario, and that is Carl and Judy decide, you know what? We're going to have fun after college. Let's go out and let's travel. Let's spend a bunch of money. Let's buy new cars. Let's upgrade the house. Let's just enjoy some stuff, okay? So at 34, they wise up and say, you know what? I feel like we've been missing the boat on saving and investing, kind of planning for a future. We're getting a little nervous. Let's start saving. So they put in $5,000 a year, and they earn 10%. And you can see what happens after 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. You see the significant difference. So when they're actually age 64, instead of $3.2 million, they have $840,000, which isn't bad, okay? But always remember, costs go up. So 30 years from now, what was a pretty good number is now not as much. But you can see the difference in 10 years. 10 years doesn't seem like a long time, okay? But it can make a huge difference over time. Now, here's the question. Any idea, I just gave it to you, any idea how much Carl and Judy would have to save every year from the time they were 34 to the time they were 64 to equate what the first couple did? They would have to save $20,000 a year. Not $5,000, but $20,000 a year. If they wanted to catch up with the first couple, they would have to work that much harder to save and invest to have the same outcome. Okay? So here's my point. If you can start early, anybody that's over the age of 50 or 60 will probably tell you, I wish I would have started earlier. Okay? Listen to that. That is a voice of wisdom. So you caught that. Okay. Guys, I have to stop, unfortunately, just because we're out of time. I've got a ton more. Maybe I can just open this up for a few questions. Tell you what, can I go? See what I mean? We can go all day. You know how much fun I had doing this? Can I go to budgeting real quick? Just because I want to highlight a couple tools that I think you guys can use. Look, I even got more. So budgeting. I think, what was your question again?
So, like, sometimes life happens, and
Yep.
like even like the emergency fund, like is it like enough?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you be flexible with your money? Because I'm the type of person who likes to plan things out, and then when life happens and you can't stick to the plan, it's really hard. So how do you be flexible with your money?
Well, here's the thing I'm always kind of preparing everyone for. You can't plan for all of life. There's just you can't, you know, and for planners, it drives you nuts because you feel like you've checked every box out there, but yet still life throws a curve. So here's the main thing. Do what you can control. That's all you can do. Do what you can control. And so the principles are, go back through them. You know, avoid the use of debt. Plan and save for the long term. Spend less than you earn. If you're following all the principles and life throws something out there that you had no way of planning for, you know what? You just have to work through it. You just have to understand, I've got to work through it. So, but what naturally happens is if you follow the principles, I just think there seems to be, and I can't even really put my finger on it, it just seems like God seems to honor it in ways too. And there seems like if you're doing it and you're following it and you're trying to honor him, it just seems like he has this unique way of kind of preventing some of those things too. So it's kind of a great defense system. The budgeting thing is going to be one of the most important things you can do. So a budget is, and a lot of people hear that B word and they almost cringe. It's like, oh, I can't do anything now with a budget. I look at it completely different. I tell people the budget is the best investment you will ever make. You will get an extra 15% more income every month by doing a budget. Because here's what happens. People that don't have a budget, their money goes wherever it wants. It's going to find its way out. People that have a budget, they're on paper, on purpose, every month, they're telling their money where it will go. It's a whole different process. And you're going to find more money in a way because you're not spending as much. Here's the other thing about a budget. It gives you permission. So, for an example, let's say you go through and you say, okay, this month we're going to bring home this much income. Here's all the different areas we're going to spend money. And let's say dining out is one of them. And you put $200 down for dining out. Well, guess what? You're allowed to spend $200 on dining out. You gave yourself permission to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. So a budget gives you freedom, but it also gives you self-control. Okay? Now, there are a lot of different ways you can do a budget. For some people, it's a yellow pad of paper. That's how I did it for the longest time. My wife and I would sit down, usually about once a week or every 2 weeks, we'd go through our budget. Other ways, because of technology today, you could use Excel. You know, you literally type in a budget in there. But here's the thing, if you do a budget but you don't track your spending, you might felt really good for doing it, but you missed the point. You have to create a budget, but then you have to track every dollar you spend. If you're not tracking where your money's going, the budget's irrelevant. So, if you put $200 down for eating out, 2 weeks in, you've spent $200. Guess what happens the next 2 weeks? You're at home, okay? It gives you some guardrails and self-control. There's different apps now. I've taken some time to try to find one that I felt like really worked for us. We landed on, Dave Ramsey created one called Every Dollar. This is a free plug for him. It cost a little bit to use the app, but I love it. It syncs with your bank account. We used to do the old cash envelope system. We did that for the longest time, but I got a little nervous about my wife carrying around a bunch of cash. Like if we get robbed, there goes the month. So we decided, hey, it's better for us to use the debit card. This is us. But every dollar is an app. It syncs securely with your bank account. You go and you create a budget inside the app, and as you spend money, it creates a little, when you open the app, there's a little notification, and it has the dollar amount and what you spent money on, and then you just move it to the category. At any point during the month, I know how much I budgeted, I know how much I spent, and I know how much is remaining. I've got it, my wife's got it. The other morning, they had a 2-hour delay for school, which was almost every morning. We laid in bed and sat there and went through every dollar together, and we talked through where our spending was. Here's where we're at, here's how much is left, what are we doing next? It added communication to our life around money and finance, which is a great gift, okay? You don't have to use that one. There's Mint, there's other programs out there you can use, Quicken. I challenge you, if nothing else, go home tonight, today, I'll try to get home by tonight, create a budget and start living by it. Day in, day out. I can promise you it will be a blessing to you, okay? Questions?
So when talking about a budget and priorities, you touched a little bit on this, like pay off debt versus invest, but what about other things like emergency funds?
Yep, so here's the thing. It's a really good question. We all have a limited number of resources. We do. There is an infinite number of places we can spend money. So guess what you have to do? You have to prioritize it. What is the most important thing I'm going to put my money to first? What's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And there comes a point where you're out of resources. Okay, does that make sense? You have to prioritize the things in your life that you feel are most important, and there's a line that eventually you crossed where there's no money left to allocate. Everything beyond that, we can't touch it right now. But you have to prioritize the things that are most important and work down that list and allocate a little bit of your resources to each as you feel necessary. So everybody's budget will be completely different. I've got some clients that don't eat out much. They eat at home. That's where they love to go, but they love to travel. Guess what? They're going to allocate more to travel. I've got some people that hate to leave Marion, Indiana. They're homebodies, but they love to eat out. Their budget's different. So you have to allocate it based on what seems right for you guys. Okay? But the point is, follow it, because that's going to keep you from overspending. Okay? Good question. Others?
You had mentioned being able to invest and get a 10% return on those investments and that savings. Where do we go to find that kind of investment?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. So if I looked at the stock market over the last 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 years, market returns have been around 10%. Okay? So just a good, we didn't get into it today, but a good, solid stock mutual fund over the long run. And I can't tell you what the future is going to hold, but in the past, that's what it's been averaging. That's not necessarily the place you're going to put your savings or your emergency fund. That's long-term money. Your savings, your emergency money, put that in your bank account. Put it in a money market account. These are accounts that are going to earn very little interest, but it's there when you need it, and it's available right away. Okay? So short-term money, use secure, low interest-bearing accounts. Long-term money, put it in good investments.